My husband threw me out for being childless. I returned 1 year later with my triplets at his wedding day. Before we begin, please subscribe to my channel, like, share, and leave a comment. Your support means a lot. Thanks. I was 25 years old when I married Mark. It feels like a lifetime ago, filled with so much hope and a different kind of innocence. Our wedding day was beautiful, a day bathed in bright, sweet sunlight. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. Mark, with his warm smile and steady job, and me, with all my dreams of building a beautiful home. We moved into a small, cozy flat, just enough for the two of us to start. My husband worked so hard. He was a kind man, and we were so in love. Our little home was our sanctuary, a place where we'd sit on the floor, mapping out our future with a sense of certainty that only young love can give. We talked about how we'd redecorate once the baby came, how we'd pick out a name, and how our home would finally feel complete. We spent our evenings curled up on the sofa, talking about the family we would build. We were so sure it would happen. We'd laugh about the number of children we wanted and even which of our parents' names we'd pass on. Our conversation wasn't about if we would have children, but when, and every part of our life was a quiet preparation for this future. We bought a small, empty baby crib and placed it in the corner of our bedroom. It was a beautiful piece of carved wood, a quiet symbol of our shared dream, a promise of a future family we knew would arrive. The crib stood there, a beacon of our love and a monument to a shared dream we had yet to fulfill. This was our ordinary world, a place of peace and shared purpose, before the true journey began. We were completely unaware of the challenges that lay ahead, the storms that would test our love, and the sacrifices that would ultimately redefine our understanding of family and happiness. Looking back, that was the calm before the storm, a period of pure, uncomplicated happiness that would soon be tainted by the relentless pressures of the world around us. The peace of our home was the first thing to be disturbed. It didn't happen overnight. It started with small, gentle questions at family gatherings, questions that felt more like nudges. So, when are you giving us grandchildren? The smiles that accompanied the words were kind, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Then the nudges turned into more pointed inquiries. The whispers started to follow me. At family dinners, the older women would look at me with a kind of pity, and I would catch them talking in hushed tones, their eyes on my empty hands. The pressure wasn't just coming from my family, it was coming from everywhere. The prevailing cultural belief was that a woman's glory is crowned in childbirth, and a childless marriage stood on shaky ground with only a slim chance of survival. This idea was a heavy burden, a social stigma that made me feel incomplete and abnormal. Friends, with the best of intentions, would introduce me to different solutions, always with a knowing look. I know a good herbalist, one would say. My aunt swore by this special tea, another would whisper. The problem of childlessness was considered to be mine alone, a reality that I was expected to solve. This was a direct result of a societal framework where women are traditionally held responsible for infertility, a perspective that persists even when the man may be the source of the issue. This disproportionate blame turned into a weapon of subjection that served to punish me for something I had no control over. I was drowning in a sea of advice and recommendations. My friends weren't just introducing me to ideas, they were pushing me to try everything they had heard about. They'd hand me little paper bags filled with dried herbs and leaves, whispering promises of a miracle. The user's query mentions that I drank many things, and this was absolutely true. My kitchen cabinet became a shrine to hope, filled with jars of dried concoctions and mysterious remedies. I drank so many herbal teas that I started to smell like a garden. I tried concoctions made from plants like Zingiber officinale, ginger, Allium sativum garlic, and Trigonella phenum graecum fenugreek, all of which were widely believed to help with female reproductive issues. My friends would say that these traditional remedies were passed down from grandmothers and were a powerful way to address what they believed was a spiritual or supernatural problem. The belief that infertility could be caused by malignant spirits or a curse was pervasive in my community, and it shaped my entire approach to finding a solution. The search wasn't just a medical one, it was a spiritual and emotional one as well. I would wake up every morning with a renewed sense of purpose, hoping that today's cup of tea would be the one that worked. I would follow the rituals to the letter, saying quiet prayers with each sip. The hope was both a powerful motivator and an exhausting burden. My body was tired, and my heart was full of a desperate yearning that no one could seem to understand. Every new remedy of hope, followed by a new wave of crushing disappointment. It was a cycle of emotional and physical exhaustion that I didn't know how to stop. The traditional healers and diviners my friends told me about were presented as priests who could remove the psychological or moral hindrances that were blocking my fertility. It was a full-time job, this search for a solution. I went to every ceremony, performed every ritual, and drank every cup of bitter tea, all in a desperate attempt to conceive. Every moment of my day was colored by this consuming quest, a quest that was becoming more isolating. I was so focused on the outcome that I barely noticed the other parts of my life starting to fall apart. As my desperate search continued, a cold, painful distance began to grow between Mark and me. The silence that had once felt comforting now felt oppressive and heavy. The external pressure was finally turning into an internal poison, seeping into the core of our marriage. Mark's emotional withdrawal was palpable. He'd come home from work, and instead of asking about my day, he'd simply sit in silence, scrolling through his phone. He no longer looked at me with the same easy love. His eyes held a growing impatience and a deep, unreadable anger. I could feel the cultural expectations weighing on him. In our society, a man's worth is deeply tied to his ability to father children and carry on his lineage. The widespread belief that there's no infertile man meant that he couldn't admit to any personal issues with fertility, even if they existed. His emotional withdrawal was a form of self-preservation, a way to cope with the shame he felt and avoid confronting his own potential role in our childlessness. This cultural dynamic forces many men to respond with aggressive behavior or to simply blame their spouse. He didn't physically lash out, but his silence and his cold demeanor were a form of punishment. Our home, which had once been our sanctuary, was now a battleground of unspoken words. Dinner would be a quiet affair, and my attempts to spark a conversation would be met with short, clipped responses. I would try to hold his hand, to reach for him, but he would pull away. He was punishing me for our childlessness, a disgrace he was made to feel was my fault alone. This gradual emotional abandonment was a heartbreaking part of the journey, as I was losing my husband to a societal pressure that had already consumed my identity. He was struggling with a conflict that he couldn't admit to, a deep-seated shame that was slowly turning him against me. The rift was widening with every passing day, preparing the ground for the unthinkable event that would soon follow. I knew we were at a breaking point. With a heavy heart, I convinced Mark to try one last thing, a formal consultation with a specialist who was highly recommended. We went to the clinic together, a silent, tense car ride to our final, desperate attempt. The waiting room was filled with other hopeful couples, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old us. This was the one time he would agree to come with me to a medical appointment, to face the problem with a formal, scientific approach. I held on to that small piece of shared hope with all my might. We were given a sterile, cold room and a kind-faced doctor who spoke with us for a long time. The doctor explained that sometimes, despite all the tests and remedies, there could be no clear reason for childlessness. The doctor told us that sometimes, fertility is a complex issue, governed not only by biology but also by factors beyond our control. After a series of tests, the doctor called us back. The news was not good. There was no single, clear solution, and our chances of conceiving naturally were extremely low. The words hung in the air, a final, crushing verdict that felt like the end of our world. We walked out of the clinic in a devastating, silent defeat. I clutched the crumpled piece of paper with the diagnosis, my knuckles white, as a single tear rolled down my cheek. The silence on the way home was the most profound one yet. It felt like the quiet of a tomb. This was the inciting incident, the final, intense setback that would force an inevitable choice. It was no longer a question of if our marriage would survive, but a certainty that it was over. I had been fighting for so long, and with this last blow, I had no fight left. My heart was broken not just for the child I would never have, but for the man I was losing and the future that was now shattered. The day after the doctor's visit was a quiet hell. The air in our small home was thick with unspoken words, so heavy that it was hard to breathe. The sound of my own footsteps felt deafening. Mark didn't say a word. He came home from work and went straight to the bedroom, not even bothering to look at me. The final verdict from the doctor had sealed our fate, and we both knew it, even though we had not yet spoken of it. I felt a profound sense of dread, a silent fear building in my chest. My mind replayed the last words of the doctor, and the cold, distant look in Mark's eyes on the way home. The story had stopped moving, and I was suspended in a state of pure, raw tension, waiting for the inevitable to happen. I knew what was coming. Our society places an unbearable weight on men to have children, and to fail in that regard is to lose a sense of masculinity and worth. The culturally false belief that the fault cannot lie with the man had been a silent force in our marriage for years, and now, with no hope left for a child, Mark would have to make a decision to reclaim his worth. He was not a bad man, but he was a man trapped by a cultural system he couldn't escape. His anger wasn't just at me, it was at his own perceived failure, a failure he had been taught to project onto me. I spent the night huddled on our sofa, looking at the empty space where the baby crib once was. The crib had been a symbol of hope, but now it was gone, a silent message that our dreams had been taken away. I was in the calm before the storm, a quiet, agonizing pause where the emotional distress was profound but hidden. I was filled with anxiety, sadness, and a deep feeling of betrayal, even though no words had yet been said. The air was so thick with unsaid things that I felt I would suffocate. I was lost in my own thoughts, grappling with the profound sense of a life that was about to disappear. I was no longer a wife, and I was no longer a hopeful mother. My identity was unraveling, and I was just waiting for the final, violent tug that would unravel it completely. He came to me while I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea. He didn't raise his voice. In fact, he spoke so quietly that the words felt even more cruel. He simply told me that our marriage was over. He said he couldn't live with the shame of not having children. He said he needed to carry on his family name, and that I was standing in the way of his destiny. He looked at me not with love, but with a cold, hard anger, as if I were a stranger who had stolen something from him. He then walked to the closet and pulled out a large suitcase. He threw my clothes into it with a brutal, dispassionate efficiency. The shock was so profound that I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I simply watched him, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. He pushed the suitcase toward me. He told me to go, to leave. He said that a man cannot be infertile and that the blame for this disgrace was mine alone. This unthinkable act was a literal manifestation of the societal punishment for childlessness. According to the cultural framework, I was the guilty one, and his action was a righteous punishment that served to expel the shame from his life. He was a man who had chosen to listen to the whispers of his community over the quiet protest of his heart. I stood there, watching my life being reduced to a single suitcase, and I knew that there was no going back. The woman who had packed up her life to move in with the love of her life was now being packed out by the same man. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up the suitcase and walked out the door. The rain was coming down in sheets, a cold, hard misery that matched the feeling in my heart. He didn't follow me. He didn't look back. I walked down the street, my shoes soaked through, the weight of the suitcase feeling heavier than 1,000 stones. I was a childless woman, a rejected wife, and a social pariah. The love story I had so carefully crafted in my mind had ended, and a new, much darker story had just begun. This moment was the catalyst that would change everything, the pivotal event that would force me to fight for my own survival. The rejection felt like physical pain, a deep ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The immediate aftermath of being thrown out was a profound state of grief. The emotional response resembled a kind of bereavement, as if a desired future had been cruelly taken away. I was a ghost in my own life, wandering from one place to another, unsure of where to go. I had lost my husband, my home, and my identity as a wife. I was a childless woman, in a society that valued women for their ability to procreate. I felt a profound sense of insecurity and diminished self-worth. It was as if I had internalized the failure of the marriage as a reflection of my own inadequacies. I spent my days in a haze of sadness, loneliness, and confusion. The emotional upheaval was so immense that I couldn't seem to process it. My emotions would swing from a profound, deep sadness to a fiery, burning anger, and then back again. I so carefully planned. Feelings of rejection were so acute that they exacerbated a deep feeling of self-doubt. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that my life was over, that I would never be happy again. This internal battle was a fight for my own psychological survival. My initial impulse was to isolate myself, to hide from the world that had cast me out. I was ashamed, and I didn't want to face the questions or the pitying looks. I felt utterly alone, with no one to turn to. I was a childless woman, and that was the only thing anyone seemed to see. The world had told me I was abnormal, and I was starting to believe it. The psychological impact of the abandonment was so profound that it was hard to even think about a future. I spent a lot of time in that dark, lonely place. But one day, I woke up and something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but a quiet, firm resolve. I was tired of being a victim. I was tired of letting Mark's rejection and the world's judgment define me. I had to pivot to a new vision of my future, a vision that I would define on my own terms. I realized that if my happiness was dependent on living the life I had in the past, then I would, in fact, never be happy again, because that life was over. I had to find a way to appreciate the simple things and build a new future. I decided to start with small, problem-focused coping strategies. I started writing in a journal, not just about my pain, but about my strengths and what I wanted to accomplish. I began taking walks, not just to move my body, but to practice mindfulness. I would look at the trees and the flowers and remind myself that I was still alive, and that life itself was a gift to be cherished. I was working on developing resilience, changing the way I looked at events that happened to me. I was not a woman who had been thrown out, I was a woman who was starting a new life. I also began to practice self-compassion. I would write to myself from the perspective of a wise and compassionate person, acknowledging my feelings and my pain. I would remind myself that my experience was a normal part of human experience, and that I was not alone in my struggle. I started to see my life not as a setback, but as a period of growth. I had lost a husband and a home, but I still had my health, my mind, and my spirit. That was more than enough to start over. This newfound strength was not a victory, it was the first, quiet step on the long road to recovery, but it was a step I had to take on my own. With a renewed sense of purpose, I knew I had to get a job. It wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my identity and my self-worth. Re-entering the workforce after being a homemaker was intimidating. I had a gap on my resume, and I felt as though I was starting from scratch. I had a lot of skills from my life as a homemaker, time management, financial planning, and organizational skills, but I had to figure out how to translate them into professional workplace skills. I enrolled in some free online courses to update my digital and tech skills, and I created a LinkedIn profile to rebuild my professional network. The journey was full of setbacks. I was rejected from several jobs, and each rejection was a painful reminder of the life I had lost. But I had learned to be persistent. I would reframe the rejections not as personal failings, but as opportunities to practice my interviewing skills. I started with a small, part-time job as a customer service representative, and with each call, I felt my confidence growing. I wasn't defined by my relationship with Mark anymore. I was defined by my own skills and my ability to succeed on my own terms. My new job gave me a sense of purpose and a community I had been missing. It was the first step in creating a new business plan for life, a plan where I was in complete control. I started to see my career break not as a setback, but as a period of growth. The job was not just a paycheck, it was a testament to my resilience. It was the first achievement I could claim as my own, a silent statement that I was not worthless, and that my life was far from over. I was finally moving from a state of survival to a state of thriving, and it felt incredible. The weight on my shoulders started to lift, and I could finally breathe again. I was building a new life, brick by brick, and it was a life that was all mine. I felt an entrepreneurial spark, a deep-seated desire to create something entirely my own. I wanted to build a business that reflected my own strengths and passions, something I could scale and grow. This was a direct act of defiance against the life I had lost, a way to prove to myself that my value was not tied to being a wife or a mother. My journey into entrepreneurship was not without its challenges, especially for a woman in my country. Women entrepreneurs in the region often face significant hurdles, including limited access to finance and professional networks. Most women in my position would have to rely heavily on personal finances, and without a husband to fall back on, I was on my own. I had no access to the same networking opportunities as men, which limited my access to capital and mentorship. But I had learned to be resourceful. I used digital marketing tools and social media platforms to build my business. I leveraged the power of the internet to create a brand, target my audience, and increase my online presence. This modern approach allowed me to bypass the traditional barriers that had held so many other women back. My business wasn't just about selling a product, it was about building a community of empowered women. I was building my own life, brick by brick, and it felt exhilarating. I was setting my own SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, for my business. I would work late into the night, but I never felt tired. My work was no longer a means to an end, it was my purpose. I was a self-made woman, and every success was a direct result of my own hard work. This was my new kind of glory, one that I had created for myself, and it felt more meaningful than anything I had ever known. My business was not just a way to make money, it was a testament to my resilience, a direct contrast to the life I was expelled from. The news came to me in a casual conversation with an old friend. She had seen a wedding invitation for Mark online. My ex-husband had married another wife. The query mentions my husband's new marriage, and the news hit me like a physical blow. The old wound, which I had thought was healed, opened up again. The first feeling was a deep, raw betrayal, and the painful knowledge that he had moved on so quickly. But that feeling quickly morphed into something else, a cold, quiet resolve. His new marriage was not just a personal betrayal, it was a public statement. He was reclaiming his worth and his position in society by taking another wife, a common solution to the problem of childlessness in our culture. I realized that this news was not a setback, but a powerful motivator. It gave me a specific, external goal for my own journey. I was no longer just healing, I was preparing for a public confrontation. I had to show him, and everyone who had judged me, that my life had not ended after he threw me out. My new resolve was not about winning him back or seeking revenge. It was about a final, definitive act of self-empowerment. It was about standing in my truth and showing that I was no longer defined by his rejection. This news provided a sense of urgency to my life, a deadline for my own success. I would not be the broken woman he left behind. I would be the woman who came back on her own terms, with a new, beautiful story to tell. The news of his marriage was the final catalyst I needed. It pushed me out of my emotional comfort zone and into a state of fierce, quiet determination. I decided that his wedding day would be my day, a day of reckoning and triumph. I would not hide in the shadows anymore. I was ready to face the world, not as a victim, but as a powerful, resilient woman who had found a new kind of happiness. I had been working to reclaim my love of life, and now I had a public stage to show everyone that my future was not only different from what I had expected, but it was all mine to make. With my new resolve, I redoubled my efforts. I had heard about a new clinic that combined modern medicine with a deep respect for traditional beliefs. I decided to give it a try. I walked into the clinic not with desperation, but with a quiet sense of hope. I was financially stable now, and my self-worth was no longer tied to my reproductive ability. I was a whole woman, with or without children. My newfound self-sufficiency allowed me to access a new world of medical resources, something I could never have done before. I sat with the doctor and spoke openly about my past and my desire for a family. She was kind and understanding. After a series of tests, she came back with the news. She told me I was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. I was in a state of shock, awe, and disbelief. And then, as if a higher power was laughing with me, she told me there were not one, but 3 heartbeats. I was pregnant with triplets. This was a miracle in every sense of the word, a profound, divine visitation that I had prayed for my entire life. My conception was not just a medical event, it was a testament to my enduring spiritual faith. In many cultures, the stories of miraculous conceptions, like those of Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah in the Bible, offer hope that fertility is a gift from a higher power. My experience was my own personal version of these stories, a reward for my perseverance and a profound act of divine grace. My long, painful journey of seeking traditional remedies and spiritual guidance had not been in vain, it had prepared me for this moment. This miracle was not a coincidence, it was a perfect blend of my faith and my newfound ability to access the best medical care. My miraculous birth was an answer to a prayer, a testament to a God who listens to the prayers of the faithful. I was filled with an overwhelming sense of joy, gratitude, and a fierce protectiveness for the 3 lives growing inside of me. I had been thrown out for being childless, and now I was a mother to 3. The irony was not lost on me. My story, which had been one of profound loss, was now a story of miraculous abundance. I was no longer a victim, I was a creator, a vessel for a new kind of life. My triplet pregnancy was a profound, but also immensely challenging, experience. The joy was immense, but it was tempered by the very real risks associated with carrying 3 lives at once. I learned that a triplet pregnancy raises the risk of complications, and that frequent checkups and specialized care were not just a suggestion, but was immense. I gained weight quickly, and the morning sickness was more severe than I could have imagined. I was on a first-name basis with my maternal fetal medicine specialist, and my schedule became a flurry of appointments. I had checkups every 2 to 3 weeks in the first trimester, and every 2 weeks in the second. In the third trimester, my appointments became weekly. The doctor kept a close eye on my health, and more importantly, on the development of the triplets. We were constantly monitoring for complications, like low birth weight and the risk of premature delivery. The average duration for a triplet pregnancy is only 32 to 35 weeks, so I knew that a preterm birth was a strong possibility. The journey was filled with anxiety, but I tried to focus on the joy. My doctor told me that triplet pregnancies were a win-win scenario for the babies and their parents, thanks to a system of specialists, obstetricians, maternal-fetal medicine specialists, pediatricians, and neonatologists, who were all working together to ensure a safe delivery. I was a nervous wreck, but I found comfort in the knowledge that I was receiving the best possible care. I was taking care of myself in a way I never had before, eating a nutritious diet and trying to stay as healthy as possible. This journey was not just a physical one, it was an emotional one as well. The triplet pregnancy was a physical and emotional roller coaster, but the journey didn't end with delivery. I had to face the very real financial and emotional challenges of raising 3 children at once. I had to manage the stress and the feeling of not being enough. I was so worried about the financial impact that I started to develop a business plan for life, with measurable goals to help me manage my finances. I learned that the financial impact of raising multiples is significant, and that expenses like diapers, clothing, and childcare are multiplied by 3. There were other, more painful anxieties to contend with. The risk of preterm delivery was high, and I knew that a NICU stay was a strong possibility. I had heard the stories of mothers who felt a profound sense of unnaturalness when their babies were taken away immediately after birth. The risk of postpartum PTSD was real, and it was a fear I had to battle every single day. I had to remind myself that my journey was not a linear path to happiness. It was a journey of struggle, and this was just another part of the story. I realized that my resilience would be tested not just by the challenges of my past, but by the joys and struggles of my future as well. To prepare, I began to set up a support system. I talked to other mothers of multiples online and learned their stories. I created a budget and a schedule to manage the coming chaos. I was doing everything in my power to prepare, but I knew that nothing could truly prepare me for the reality of raising 3 children at once. This section is a crucial break in the story, reminding the audience that my journey is not a perfect fairy tale. My anxieties and fears added depth to my character, making my eventual triumph even more meaningful. The struggle to prepare was a vital part of the story. The table below details the financial and emotional realities I was preparing for. The day came sooner than expected. My waters broke at 33 weeks, and I was rushed to the hospital. I was terrified. The risks of preterm birth were high, and I knew a NICU stay was likely. I was prepped for an emergency C-section. The doctors and nurses worked with a quiet, calm efficiency that belied the seriousness of the moment. I had waited for this moment my entire life, and now it was here, but in a way I had not anticipated. The delivery was a blur of medical instructions and intense emotion. I heard the first baby cry, a beautiful, high-pitched wail. Then the second, and then the third. The doctors held them up for a brief moment, and I saw their tiny, perfect faces. I was in a state of shock, awe, and immense joy. The triplets were here. They were small, but they were breathing and they were beautiful. Their names came to me as soon as I saw them: David, Daniel, and Matthew. They were taken to the NICU immediately, as expected, to receive the specialized care they needed. The first moments of their life were spent on CPAP machines for added oxygen, but they were alive and they were thriving. For a moment, a wave of profound peace washed over me. I had carried them for so long, and now they were here, 3 separate, perfect lives. I spent the next few days in the hospital, recovering, and my nights were spent walking back and forth to the NICU. It was a painful separation, but it was also a time for me to witness their resilience. I would sit by their incubators, my heart full, watching them grow stronger with each passing day. The journey to get to this point was a long, hard one, filled with tears and disappointment, but it was worth every single moment. I was a mother, not just to 1, but to 3, and that was a victory that no one could ever take from me. My life with the triplets, a year later, was a beautiful, controlled chaos. The user's query states that I returned 1 year later, and a year with 3 babies is a whirlwind. My life was no longer my own, but it was filled with so much more. We had a synchronized schedule for feeding, sleeping, and activities, but it was a schedule that was constantly being tested by the individual needs of 3 little boys. There was always a mountain of laundry, endless bottles to wash, and a constant need for my attention. I was always tired, but I was never happier. The most surprising and beautiful part of the journey was the unique bond that existed between my boys. They were like a little team, a club of their own, with an invisible string that connected them. They would scoot together to snuggle and hold hands in their sleep. They would play together for hours, their imaginations boundless. I would often sit and just watch them, my heart full of so much joy. I had been told that I would never get out of the house with multiples, but my husband and I made a promise to not be those people. We were constantly on the go, making sure our children experienced the world. My life was no longer defined by my past, but by the beautiful, challenging, and loving reality of my present. The story was not a perfect fairy tale ending where everything was easy. I still had moments of feeling overwhelmed, and I had to remind myself that it was okay if today didn't go as I had planned. I had found my true purpose, not in a man or a social status, but in the love and chaos of my own home. My family was my own, and it was a victory I had earned with my own sweat, tears, and resilience. My life was now a testament to a new kind of glory, one that was defined by love and abundance, not by social expectations. A few weeks before Mark's wedding day, I received a wedding invitation from an old friend. He was going to a lavish ceremony in the city. The friend had no idea of my past with Mark. The invitation was a beautiful, elegant card, and as soon as I read his name, my heart skipped a beat. It was him. He was getting married. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The query states my husband married another wife, and this was my chance to face my past on my own terms. The woman I was a year ago would have been crushed, but the woman I had become was not. My decision to go was not about winning him back or seeking revenge. It was about a final act of self-empowerment, a way to put a period at the end of a very long, painful sentence. I was no longer the broken woman he had abandoned. I was a triumphant mother and a successful businesswoman. I had a new family, a new purpose, and a new kind of happiness. Going to his wedding was my way of reclaiming my narrative, of showing everyone who had judged me that my life was not over. It was a final step in my healing journey, a way to prove to myself that I had moved on from the pain and betrayal. My children were not just my babies, they were living proof of my resilience, a physical manifestation of a miracle I had earned. I decided that I would walk into that wedding hall not as a ghost of his past, but as a testament to my own future. My arrival was not a cry for attention, it was a quiet, powerful statement that I was no longer his story. He had thrown me out for being childless, and now I was returning with not 1, but 3 beautiful children. I had redefined my own glory, and my own sense of family, and now it was time for the world to see it. The stage was set for the final, most powerful moment of my I arrived at Mark's wedding with my head held high, my heart filled with a profound sense of peace. The music was playing, the guests were laughing, and the wedding hall was bathed in a soft, celebratory light. I was dressed in a simple, but elegant, flowing yellow dress. In my arms, I held David, my smallest and most serene baby, and at my feet, Daniel and Matthew, dressed in matching little suits, were holding onto my legs. I walked down the aisle, my eyes fixed on Mark, who was standing at the altar with his new bride. The query states I returned with my triplets at his wedding day, and that is precisely what I did. User query. The moment he saw me, his face went white. The music seemed to stop, the laughter died down, and a profound silence fell over the room. His new wife, seeing his reaction, turned to look at me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and confusion. For a single, long moment, I stood there, a woman who had been thrown out for being childless, with my 3 beautiful children, living proof of a miracle. The looks on the faces of the guests were a mix of awe and disbelief. I had not come to ruin his day. I had come to close a chapter of my life, a chapter that he had tried to define for me. The look on Mark's face was not one of anger, but of profound shock, regret, and awe. He had thrown away a woman for being incomplete, and she had returned as a mother to 3. I turned and walked out of the hall, not with a triumphant stride, but with a quiet, peaceful grace. I was not a woman seeking revenge. I was a woman who had come full circle, who had reclaimed her own life, and who had found a new kind of glory. The ultimate payoff for the audience was this powerful, quiet moment. I left him not in bitterness, but in a profound sense of peace. My victory was not in his defeat, but in my own hard-won happiness. The story does not end at the wedding. That was just a public act of closure. The real victory, the true happiness, was in the quiet moments that followed. Life that was all mine. I was no longer the woman who was defined by her longing for a child. I was a mother, an entrepreneur, and a creator of my own destiny. My glory was not crowned in childbirth. It was found in the woman I became, in the woman who was strong enough to face her own pain and build a new, beautiful life for herself and her children. The journey had taught me that happiness is not about getting what you want, it is about finding a new definition of it on your own terms. My future was not the one I had planned as a young bride, but it was a future that was small and quiet and different from what I expected, and it was all mine. My children were the living proof of my resilience and my abundance, but my self-worth was the true prize. I had found a way to reclaim my love of life, and to cherish the simple things, a baby's laugh, a hand to hold, a moment of peace in the midst of the beautiful chaos. But my life continues. I am a mother to 3 perfect boys. I have a business that I am proud of. I have a life that is filled with love and purpose. My journey was long and painful, but it led me to a place that was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. My victory was not in returning with triplets. My victory was in becoming the woman who could handle them, and in finding a new kind of happiness that no one could ever take from me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like this video, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I love you all. Bye.